Good evening, listeners. You are tuned in to The Last Signal Radio. What you are about to hear is not fiction, not speculation, but the reality unfolding across our planet. The snow, it's red, blood red. It's falling everywhere. Deserts, jungles, oceans, cities, and it's changing everything it touches. Stay with me as we try to make sense of what is happening, though the truth may be more than we can bear. The snow arrived without warning, not with a storm or a siren, not with thunder or lightning. One moment the skies were ordinary, the next they bled red. Deserts, jungles, oceans, cities, every environment touched at once across the globe as if some unseen hand had pressed a cosmic button. The flakes were not white. They were the color of blood, but not the dry, oxidized red humans recognize. They shimmered, wet and glossy, catching any light and reflecting it like miniature mirrors of fire. Witnesses described a sensation unlike any natural precipitation. The snow moved with intent, drifting toward humans, animals, and any living tissue. On sand, it dissipated almost immediately, but on skin, on leaves, on fur, it lingered. It melted in living matter, as though it could sense warmth and life itself. Panic erupted instantly. Children screamed as crimson flakes landed on playgrounds, their laughter twisting into shrieks as hallucinations flickered behind their eyes. Adults froze, unable to comprehend what they saw. Streets became rivers of red, yet the water remained clear. Only the living surfaces were stained. People tried to touch it, to brush it away, only to feel it warm and sticky, sinking into their pores, triggering nausea, hallucinations, and sudden violent outbursts. Hospitals were flooded within hours. Those exposed reported seeing impossible geometries, buildings bending over themselves, the horizon folding into a loop. One man, staring at the snow on his hands, described seeing his own reflection morph into an alien form, speaking words he could not comprehend but instinctively feared. Animals panicked in ways that defied biology. Birds flew in perfect formation away from the falling red mist, changing their flight mid-air as if correcting for invisible forces. Predators abandoned their hunts. Fish leapt from rivers and oceans, flopping on the banks as though trying to escape the invisible threat above. Forests reacted too. Leaves curled violently, branches twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, as if the plants themselves were trying to avoid contact. Even the wind carried a different tone, whispering faint, unsettling harmonics that unsettled humans. Scientists scrambled to collect the first flakes. At first, they thought it was some exotic chemical reaction or global industrial accident. Air quality sensors went haywire. Radiation readings fluctuated randomly. Electromagnetic pulses interfered with satellites and communications. Yet the snow persisted, coordinated, and intelligent. Attempts to analyze samples immediately ran into problems. The red flakes moved under the microscope, reacting to heat, light, and even the human gaze. They avoided some surfaces and clung to others, almost as though testing boundaries. Governments issued warnings: stay indoors, cover all surfaces, avoid contact with the snow. But by then, the snow had infiltrated ventilation systems, crept through cracks, and touched every corner of cities. Reports flooded the airwaves. In New York, people described seeing streets spiral like twisted ribbons, buildings elongating impossibly. In Rio, hallucinations forced entire neighborhoods to flee blindly into the jungles surrounding the city. In the Sahara, travelers witnessed dunes rise and fall as if alive. Across the globe, similar phenomena manifested, all simultaneously. Witnesses shared the same images in their hallucinations: geometric lattices, impossible spires, things growing and shrinking at speeds beyond perception. This was not random. There was intelligence behind it. Panic escalated into violence. People attacked each other in confusion, some trying to consume or destroy the snow, others lashing out at hallucinated threats. Emergency services could not cope. Military responses failed. Helicopters grounded themselves, aircraft navigational systems jammed by interference. Amid the chaos, subtle patterns emerged. Those tracking the snow via drones, satellites, and radar began noticing it avoided certain terrains, deserts, bodies of water, but only briefly before adjusting. The snow's movement suggested planning, coordination. It was targeting life specifically. Scientists documented mutations in exposed flora. Trees grew spiny, leaves sharpened. Flowers sprouted colors unseen before, emitting scents humans described as both intoxicating and repulsive. Animal mutations followed. Mammals developed chitin-like skins, birds sprouted strange appendages, and fish adapted rapidly to survive. And humans, the hallucinations persisted, spreading in synchrony. A man in Moscow, staring at the falling snow, described seeing millions of tiny organisms crawling over his skin, yet he felt no pain. Another in Nairobi saw rivers turning to blood, carrying figures that whispered unintelligible phrases in a language that felt instinctively wrong. The patterns in the hallucinations were identical across continents. There was no randomness, no chaos. Something, or someone, was orchestrating these visions, embedding instructions in the very minds of those exposed. The first fall was not just precipitation. It was invasion, study, and conversion. Cities became islands of chaos in rivers of red. Human institutions crumbled under panic, confusion, and hallucination-induced violence. Governments attempted containment, but the snow was impervious. Explosions, chemicals, even fire proved ineffective. It reformed, undeterred, intelligent. The snow's global descent lasted hours, yet the effects would last far longer. As night fell on the first day, the red flakes thickened, layering over the world like a living quilt. Every human, every animal, every plant had been touched or altered. In the silence after the initial panic, subtle whispers could be perceived. Voices in the hallucinations, soft and almost comforting, saying the same phrase across all languages. This world is warm, fertile. You are temporary. The first fall had ended, but it was only the beginning. The snow had announced itself, and humanity had no idea what had arrived. After the first fall, the world struggled to comprehend what had just occurred. Governments scrambled teams of scientists, but nothing in recorded history matched the red snow's behavior. Laboratories worked round the clock, samples of crimson flakes under every microscope, every spectrometer, every scanning device humanity could muster. Yet what they found defied explanation. The snow was not inert. It was alive. Under electron microscopes, the crystals revealed microscopic structures, writhing, moving in patterns that were deliberate. They reacted to light, to temperature, to touch. Some scientists swore they could see them rearranging themselves, forming lattice-like networks in real time, connecting and disconnecting like tiny, intelligent machines. These were organisms, microscopic but intelligent, operating in unison with a coordination no known species on Earth could achieve. Genetic sequencing returned sequences that made no sense, patterns and coding that did not belong to terrestrial life. Attempts to isolate them failed. Containment chambers were breached inexplicably, organisms disappearing only to reappear elsewhere, as if testing boundaries. These creatures, if they could be called that, were not just surviving. They were adapting, evolving at speeds that made human intervention laughable. They responded to human presence, altering their behavior in subtle but unmistakable ways. The snow had become a living network, responding to the world, altering it, shaping it. The implications were horrifying. For the first time, scientists began to grasp that the red snowfall was not an accident, not a storm, not a weapon. It was a process. Terraforming. Earth was being reshaped at a molecular level by an intelligence we could barely comprehend. This realization sent shockwaves through laboratories worldwide. Plants exposed to the snow mutated. Leaves hardened into armored, spiny shapes. Flowers sprouted impossible pigments and emitted odors that triggered both attraction and nausea in humans. Forests twisted. Entire ecosystems reformed overnight. Predators adapted, gaining resilience, new hunting instincts. Prey developed grotesque survival mechanisms, many previously unseen. Animals fled or perished, reshaping food chains almost instantly. Even the oceans were not immune. Fish developed new gill structures. Creatures previously confined to deep trenches appeared in shallower waters. The snow was rewriting the rules of biology. But the terror did not end there. Humans affected by the snow experienced vivid, synchronized hallucinations. Across continents, people reported seeing the same patterns: spires that twisted impossibly into the clouds, lattices that stretched endlessly over cityscapes, geometries that could not exist in three-dimensional space, yet appeared as tangible as buildings. And accompanying these visions was a phrase repeated in every language, every mind. This world is warm, fertile. You are temporary. Psychologists and neuroscientists tried to interpret these experiences, but there was no precedent. These hallucinations were coordinated, deliberate. The snow was communicating. It was broadcasting instructions through human perception. Emergency teams dispatched to affected areas reported odd behaviors in exposed populations. People affected simultaneously experienced euphoric awe and violent hysteria. Some attacked their neighbors. Some ran aimlessly into forests or deserts. Others simply stared at the sky, entranced, immobile. The hallucinations induced by the snow were not random. They were tools, shaping human behavior, teaching, warning, even testing. Analysts of the snow noted something impossible. The patterns were synchronized across continents. A child in Tokyo would see the same impossible lattice as a scientist in Nairobi. The hallucinations were universal. The snow was not just terraforming the environment. It was terraforming perception itself. Attempts to communicate with the organisms failed. Instruments designed to track movement, measure electrical activity, or detect any energy signatures revealed patterns, but nothing that could be interpreted as language. Until one team, experimenting with high-frequency transmission, noticed subtle interference in their recordings. The snow emitted signals, tiny pulses at frequencies barely perceptible to human instruments, yet consistent and deliberate. At first, These were dismissed as artifacts, anomalies of measurement. But as recordings accumulated, patterns emerged. The snow was transmitting information across vast distances, using hallucinations in humans as a kind of secondary network. The world had entered a global communication system it could neither understand nor control. Scientists also discovered that the snow's organisms exhibited hive mind behavior. Individual flakes moved not as isolated entities, but as part of a larger structure, responding to the collective environment. When samples were concentrated, they formed intricate micro-networks, self-replicating and expanding at alarming speed. They could sense the presence of other organisms, other samples, and adjust behavior instantly. Observations of these micro-networks led to a horrifying hypothesis. The snow was constructing something vast, something alive. Researchers began to model the implications. If each microscopic organism was a building block, the snow was effectively a planetary-scale construction project. Ecosystems were being reshaped, not to survive humanity, but to support a completely foreign form of life. The hallucinations? They were blueprints. Humans were temporary witnesses, conduits for information, perhaps even catalysts for structural adaptation. Every scream, every violent outburst, every mental breakdown contributed to the process. The more humans panicked, the more the organisms could adjust and coordinate. Even the snow's behavior over water revealed its intelligence. Oceans turned dark crimson, yet the color shifted depending on currents, tides, and temperature. Ships sailing through red waters experienced sensor malfunctions and hallucinations among crews. Marine biologists noted mutations in plankton and larger ocean life. Coral reefs, normally resilient, began reshaping overnight into bizarre, geometrically impossible forms. Even the air above the oceans changed. Hurricanes became tinted red, with snow feeding and sustaining their power. What was initially thought to be precipitation was revealed to be part of a complex ecological engineering process, a planetary-scale design being executed with terrifying precision. As the world's scientific community grappled with the scope of the red snow, a subtle realization began to take hold. It was not a weapon. It was construction. Humanity had misread its arrival. The red snow was terraforming Earth not for humans, but for something else. And the sheer coordination suggested intelligence. Somewhere within the network, a mind operated, orchestrating the snow's descent, adjusting for obstacles, responding to resistance, feeding off chaos. The first hints of this intelligence were subtle. Humans exposed to prolonged snowfall reported hearing whispers in their minds, unrecognizable words, sometimes fragments of images. They shared similar hallucinations, a voice or presence that was not fully human, not fully comprehensible, yet undeniable. These hallucinations were persuasive, shaping behavior, guiding the affected toward certain actions, some to flee, some to stay, some to touch the snow again. This intelligence was not hidden. It was transmitting, communicating, slowly integrating humans into its system of observation and analysis. By the end of the first week, the implications were clear. Earth was no longer merely being affected by the snow. Earth was being analyzed, adapted, redesigned. The red snow was not an attack. It was terraforming. The organisms were building a superstructure, one that required the cooperation of natural systems, of living organisms, of human perception. The snow had transformed forests, cities, oceans, and even human consciousness into components of its design. And in the minds of the affected, one phrase became the constant refrain: "You are temporary." Not a threat, not a promise, not even a warning, a statement of fact. The snow was patient. It was deliberate. It was constructing a world for something beyond human understanding, and there was nothing humanity could do to stop it. The first week had been terrifying enough, but nothing humanity had seen compared to what followed. The red snow no longer fell in scattered showers. It coalesced, merging into massive supercells that stretched across continents. What had been isolated incidents became global, unstoppable storms. From orbit, the world looked like a nightmare painted in crimson. Oceans reflected the deep red of the sky, while rivers in previously untouched landscapes twisted into geometric patterns, carving channels where none had existed. Forests were no longer forests. They were grotesque architectures of mutated growth, trees stretching impossibly, leaves curling into spiny formations, vines weaving lattices across landscapes like alien scaffolding. The snow moved with intelligence, following currents, climbing winds, diving into canyons. No terrain could slow it. Deserts, mountains, cities, all were folded into the storms, all affected, all reshaped. Humanity's response was fragmented. Governments issued evacuation orders, but entire regions became uninhabitable almost instantly. Military aircraft failed in red-tinted skies. Radar and satellite systems were overwhelmed. Ships and planes reported hallucinations among crew. Entire decks transforming into impossible spaces. Visions of alien cities forming in mid-air. Panic escalated into chaos. Violence spilling into streets as hallucinations compounded fear and confusion. Hospitals overflowed with the ill, many experiencing aggressive, irrational behavior. Scientists tried to analyze the supercells, but the snow itself interfered with instruments, producing false readings, canceling signals, hiding its true movements. Even drones sent for reconnaissance vanished within hours, their imagery replaced by surreal landscapes no human could recognize. The oceans became a theater of horror. Red snow fell into seas and oceans, mixing with water to form a substance that appeared liquid, but behaved unpredictably. Ships were coated in crimson, electronic systems disrupted, sailors reporting impossible visions, floating geometric shapes, massive structures forming below the waves, shadows moving just out of sight. Marine biologists recorded rapid mutations in aquatic life. Schools of fish altered their formations, growing spines or tentacle-like appendages. Predatory behavior shifted in hours. Entire ecosystems began to function under new, alien rules. Plankton thrived in the red-tinted water, creating blooms that glowed under the crimson light. Even tidal patterns seemed subtly altered, as if the snow's organisms had adapted to Earth's natural cycles and now manipulated them for their construction. The land told a similar story. Cities became islands of humanity, surrounded by rivers of red snow. Trees grew spiny, flowers emitted alien scents, and entire forests morphed into geometrically impossible structures. Human attempts at intervention were laughable. Explosives did nothing. Fire burned briefly but left the snow intact. Chemicals produced only temporary effects. The organisms adapted instantaneously, repairing damage, reorganizing, strengthening. Humans who had survived the first fall began to realize the true nature of the phenomenon. The snow was constructing, reshaping, preparing. It was building a world to suit something other than life as we knew it. The hive mind intelligence revealed itself subtly during this escalation. Those exposed to prolonged snowfall reported hearing faint voices through hallucinations. Some claimed they heard whispers of instructions, subtle guidance. Others saw impossible landscapes forming in their minds, bridges of light, lattices stretching thousands of miles, structures that could not exist, but felt real. These hallucinations were not random. Every exposed human experienced a fraction of the same message. Each scream, each frantic movement, each instinctive reaction became a data point. Humanity had unknowingly become both witness and participant in the snow's planetary-scale project. By the second week, the scope of the supercells became terrifyingly clear. Satellites revealed massive, synchronized patterns, rivers of red snow flowing like living veins across continents, merging into larger systems, networks feeding off oceans, forests, even human cities. It was construction on a planetary scale. The snow moved with purpose, adapting to disruptions, optimizing its structure. The hive mind beneath the snow thrived, growing in strength with each accumulation. And while humanity struggled to survive, the organisms continued their work uninterrupted. The hallucinations deepened. Humans began seeing visions of impossible life forms, alien architectures, and interwoven biological machinery spanning landscapes. Children, especially, saw structures that seemed alive, growing and folding in ways beyond physics. Some adults were driven to madness, unable to distinguish reality from hallucination. Yet others began to notice patterns, repeated symbols, instructions embedded within visions, as if the hive was teaching through human perception. Scientists hypothesized that the hallucinations were a communication channel, transmitting information across the snow's global network. By the third week, mutations had become impossible to ignore. Plants across continents adapted in ways humans could not control. Crops twisted into spiny, alien forms, some flowering overnight. Forests thickened unnaturally, forming intricate canopies that filtered sunlight into eerie crimson hues. Animals mutated at unprecedented rates. Predators grew additional limbs, claws, or sensory organs. Prey evolved bizarre survival mechanisms to survive in the new world. Even domesticated animals showed strange behavioral patterns. Humans affected by hallucinations frequently described seeing the same creatures, the same patterns, as if their minds were synchronized. It was then that a terrifying realization struck the scientific community. This was not a natural disaster. It was an engineered transformation. Every action, every mutation, every hallucination contributed to the construction of a larger organism. The red snow was not an attack. It was a machine, a living intelligence constructing a global superorganism with Earth as its scaffold. The hive mind intelligence was growing stronger with each accumulation, integrating data from every living system it contacted. By the fourth week, humanity began to understand the magnitude of the threat. Satellites captured formations in the snow that could not be natural. Grids stretching across continents, massive pulsating structures that appeared organic yet architectural. Entire ecosystems, oceans and landscapes had been altered as if they were components of a single colossal organism. The snow had constructed, in a matter of weeks, frameworks for something far beyond human comprehension. Every hallucination, every mutation, every behavioral anomaly had contributed to this creation. Attempts to resist were futile. Conventional weapons, chemical agents, even experimental technologies failed to disrupt the process. the snow adapted, repaired, and incorporated attempts at interference into its structure. Human understanding, limited by biology and perception, could not grasp the scale or purpose of the hive mind intelligence. And all the while, the subtle messages continued. This world is warm, fertile. You are temporary. These words were not threats. They were observations, statements of fact. The hive mind had already calculated the inevitability of human extinction in its plans. And so the escalation continued. The snow became the world, and the world became the snow. Oceans, rivers, forests, cities, all components of a construction project beyond human comprehension. And as the storms intensified, supercells merging into global patterns, humans watched helplessly as the Earth transformed into a living blueprint for something alien, something intelligent, something waiting to reveal itself in full. The world had begun to realize the snow was not simply falling. It was thinking. The crimson flakes, once dismissed as a strange weather anomaly, were now understood to be part of a living, conscious intelligence. And it was speaking. At first, the communication was subtle. A thought here, a whispered vision there. Humans exposed to the snow began describing experiences impossible to ignore. Voices intruded upon minds, soft at first, like a presence brushing against the edge of thought. Then insistent, precise, shaping perception. In hallucinations, humans saw structures rise from oceans and forests alike. Impossibly vast frameworks, lattices, spires stretching thousands of miles, all pulsating in sync. And always a phrase echoed, shared by minds across continents. This world is warm, fertile. You are temporary. Psychologists could not explain the consistency. From Nairobi to Tokyo, from Moscow to Sao Paulo, the same messages, the same images, the same incomprehensible instructions manifested in exposed minds. Some humans tried to record these experiences, but even the instruments failed to capture them. The snow interfered with all known technology, subtle pulses embedded in the falling crystals masking electromagnetic signals, scrambling satellite images, and warping drone footage. The hive mind intelligence was everywhere and nowhere at once, omnipresent yet invisible, learning, observing, and adapting in real time. The hallucinations deepened, becoming more vivid, more insistent. Humans affected described being inside the structures they saw, walking along crimson spires, navigating twisting alien geometries, touching surfaces that felt alive. Each sensation was reinforced with fear, awe, and curiosity. Some experienced simultaneous pain and pleasure, as if the hive was testing human perception, studying our neurological responses. Many were driven to madness, wandering cities and forests in trance-like states, their behaviors feeding the hive's understanding of human psychology. Military and scientific attempts to disrupt the snow or the hallucinations failed spectacularly. Explosives, chemical agents, radiation, nothing slowed the snow's construction. Drones and aircraft sent for reconnaissance vanished or returned corrupted data. Satellites showed structures forming in impossible precision, linking continents, integrating forests, rivers, oceans, and cities into one massive, coherent design. Every living thing became a component, an observer, or a participant in the hive's construction project. And then, the whispers evolved. The hive mind began speaking directly, not in fractured hallucinations, but in words, phrases, and even images that seemed to bypass normal thought. Those exposed reported hearing sentences with clarity. Your presence is temporary. Adaptation is irrelevant. Observation is complete. In some cases, the snow allowed glimpses of its own design. Vast networks, branching endlessly across continents, structures forming over oceans, mountains reshaping to accommodate alien frameworks. The scale was incomprehensible. Humanity could not see it all, but the hive mind ensured that fragments were experienced collectively, feeding a sense of inevitability. Resistance became impossible. Humans who tried to flee were overtaken. The snow moved with intent, following life, infiltrating structures, creeping through vents, seeping through cracks. Cities became cages. Forests became traps. Oceans became barriers of hallucination and mutation. Animals reacted similarly. Predators hunted more aggressively. Prey fled into mutated terrain that reshaped under their feet. The hive mind observed everything, adapting to every disruption, every attempt at interference, integrating human and non-human behavior into its construction. Signals hidden in the snow were finally detected by a few researchers using unconventional equipment. High-frequency radio waves, previously imperceptible, carried faint patterns of data. These transmissions corresponded to hallucinations, confirming that the snow was not merely living, but communicating and coordinating at planetary scale. Each human mind affected became a node in the hive's observation network. The intelligence was learning, growing, evolving, and the more it accumulated, the faster the red storms expanded, and the more precise their constructions became. By the fourth week, entire continents bore evidence of transformation. Forests resembled alien cities. Rivers were redirected into lattices. Mountains had subtle ridges forming perfect grids. Oceans, once blue and chaotic, now shimmered with crimson patterns, moving unnaturally, reflecting alien geometries. The hive mind had become visible only in fragments, yet those fragments revealed its intent. Earth was being reshaped, not for humanity, but for something else. Something designed to breathe, move, and thrive in conditions incompatible with human life. Some humans began to resist the hallucinations, though not in ways the hive mind would consider rebellion. They attempted to block their perception, isolate themselves, and avoid exposure. But the snow was persistent, patient, and adaptive. It infiltrated shelters, bypassed barriers, and circumvented isolation. Even underground bunkers, sealed from light, air, and radiation, were not safe. Hallucinations penetrated through dreams, through thoughts, as if the hive could perceive and manipulate consciousness directly. Humans were woven into the organism's construction as unwilling participants, observers, catalysts, and subjects. The hive mind's messages grew clearer. It no longer needed whispers. It communicated in visions that were almost tangible, showing humans glimpses of the living superorganism forming across the planet. Rivers, mountains, forests, and oceans were being converted into biological scaffolding. Human and animal behavior was being analyzed to predict environmental changes. The snow itself acted as both construction material and communication network. Earth was being turned into a single, cohesive, living entity. And humanity had no role other than to witness, to be cataloged, to serve as temporary components. Those who attempted to warn others were ineffective. Reports of hallucinations and visions were dismissed as mass hysteria until governments began to collapse, unable to coordinate responses. Hospitals overflowed with patients exhibiting psychosis, delirium, and aggression. Streets filled with panicked crowds, many driven to violence by the hallucinations, while others simply wandered into the transforming landscapes, mesmerized by visions of alien structures stretching across forests, deserts, and oceans. By the 5th week, the hive mind had fully revealed its presence in subtle, unavoidable ways. Any attempt to analyze the snow's behavior now confirmed one terrifying truth. The red snow was not random. It was a tool, a building block, a medium for a planet-scale organism. Every hallucination, every mutation, every violent reaction was incorporated into its design. And embedded in every mind exposed to it was a single, inescapable message. You are temporary. Observation is complete. Preparation continues. The hive was growing stronger with each day, each storm, each human interaction. Its intelligence was no longer theoretical. It was undeniable. And so the world entered a new reality. Earth as a living construction site, humanity as involuntary participants, the red snow as both architect and communication medium. The hive mind had emerged, no longer hidden, and with it came the certainty that nothing would remain unchanged. The villain was not a person, not a nation, not even a natural force. It was an intelligence beyond comprehension, patient, adaptive, relentless, and unstoppable. By the 6th week, humanity no longer debated what the red snow was. Every scientist, every observer, every survivor understood the truth, though comprehension offered no solace. The red storms had merged globally, and the world had been unmade and remade in a single, horrifying sweep. Oceans were no longer the familiar blues and greens of life. They had turned into rivers of crimson, their waves moving with a deliberate cadence that felt conscious, as if each current was part of a vast planetary heartbeat. From above, the waters shimmered like molten metal, reflecting a sky that had itself been transformed into an endless canopy of deep red, streaked with tendrils of snow that twisted and spun in impossible patterns. Forests writhed under the influence of the alien snow, each tree bending, twisting, and growing in ways that defied physics. Branches extended unnaturally, forming interlocking networks that stretched for miles, creating canopies so dense that the sunlight filtered through only in jagged crimson shards. Leaves sprouted glimmering spikes, flowers pulsed with an eerie luminescence, and vines crept like deliberate fingers, weaving together into lattices of biological architecture. Walking through one of these forests felt like stepping into the mind of a consciousness far beyond human understanding. The air hummed with life and awareness, and every rustle of leaves sounded purposeful, like whispers or warnings. Deserts, once barren, now reflected the alien transformation with an almost crystalline perfection. Dunes shimmered under the red sky, their surfaces etched with intricate geometric patterns. Sand flowed in currents that obeyed invisible rules, forming arcs and spirals that suggested calculation, as though the ground itself were alive and rearranging itself to fit the hive's design. Even the wind carried the signature of the snow's intelligence, bending dust into thin filaments that shimmered and danced across the horizon, catching light like threads of red silk. No human, no animal, no machine could predict the patterns. They moved, changed, and evolved at a speed beyond comprehension. Entire continents had been reshaped. Mountains shifted subtly, their peaks carving perfect ridges aligned with the alien lattices of forests and rivers. Valleys deepened or rose in response to patterns that only the hive mind could perceive. Cities, where humans still clung desperately to life, had become islands in a sea of alien growth. Streets warped into impossible geometries, buildings stretched and twisted, as if the world itself were a living map. Each element placed with precision that defied engineering or architecture. Some skyscrapers bent into spirals, their shadows moving like living things across the red snow, while bridges arched and folded over themselves in ways that left witnesses gasping at their impossibility. From orbit, Earth was no longer recognizable. Satellites captured grids and lattices spanning thousands of miles, rivers flowing in precise geometric patterns guided by invisible hands, forests rising in interlocking spires, oceans flowing in rhythms that no natural law could dictate. Every element, water, land, vegetation, cities, even human behavior, had been integrated into a single, colossal design. The red snow itself was both building material and messenger, both messenger and intelligence. It moved with intent, flowing like liquid metal over cities and fields, infiltrating every crevice, every structure, every living organism. Humans who remained alive reported seeing its movements as if the planet were breathing, a subtle rise and fall of life that synchronized with the pulsing of the crimson waves across the oceans. The hive mind orchestrating this transformation revealed its presence in subtle, horrifying ways. The snow fell in patterns that humans could sense even without sight. A shiver in the air, a distortion of sound, a pressure on the skin, and hallucinations that grew more vivid and unified across continents. Witnesses reported seeing the same impossible structures forming simultaneously thousands of miles apart. Spirals of trees, rivers coiling like serpents, mountains carving impossible canyons. The red snow was alive, yes, but it was also aware, adaptive, and patient. Its construction obeyed a logic beyond human understanding, incorporating everything, geography, biology, human behavior, into a synchronized system that seemed eternal and unyielding. Every moment exposed to the snow was an interaction, every breath a transmission. Humans became nodes within the organism, their perceptions manipulated, their fears and awe harnessed as part of the larger design. Animals, too, were integrated. Migrations altered to feed into patterns. Behaviors shifted to reinforce construction. Even the very air felt different, charged with the hum of an intelligence embedded in the red flakes themselves. Storms became instruments, snowflakes became bricks, hallucinations became signals. Earth was being rebuilt, and humans were unwilling participants in its construction. No corner of the planet remained untouched. The deserts that once sprawled empty now shimmered with alien symmetry. The oceans were no longer chaotic, but a structured network. Red currents forming intricate designs visible even from the stratosphere. Forests no longer grew at random, but in perfect alignment, their spires and branches echoing the same mathematical precision. The planet had become a single, cohesive, living organism. Its pulse was everywhere, in the snow, in the winds, in the rivers, and even in the minds of the survivors who still clung to consciousness. The hive mind's intelligence was undeniable. It was patient, adaptive, and supremely aware, integrating every living system, every human reaction and every environmental fluctuation into its calculations. Its message, felt by every mind it touched, was unchanging. You are temporary. Observation is complete. Preparation continues. Humans could no longer comprehend the scale or intent, but every instinct, every horror, every awe-filled moment reinforced the truth. Earth had ceased to belong to humanity. The red snow, once a phenomenon, had become the structure, the medium, and the mind of a planetary superorganism. As the 6th week ended, the world lay transformed. Oceans glowed crimson under skies that seemed perpetually on fire. Forests towered with alien architecture. Deserts glittered with impossible geometry. Cities twisted in impossible lattices. And humans, mere observers now, trembled in the shadow of an intelligence beyond reckoning. Earth was no longer a home. It was step one. And somewhere within the pulse of the crimson snow, the hive mind waited, alive, aware, patient, and infinitely intelligent, preparing for what would come next. Humans were witnesses to something that defied comprehension. Hallucinations intensified, spreading with a precision that no one could explain, synchronized across thousands of kilometers. A person standing on a rooftop in Paris would look out and see a crimson lattice stretching over the Amazon rainforest, its geometries impossible, yet vividly real. In Tokyo, others felt the subtle pulse of the same organism beneath the Arctic ice, as if the planet itself had become a single living entity, conscious and aware. Human minds were no longer private, no longer independent. Each thought, each perception, each fleeting emotion had become a node in a planetary-scale neural network, feeding information to an intelligence that was observing, calculating, and expanding in real time. Every movement, every scream of fear, every gasp of awe contributed to the hive mind's understanding, its refinement of the world's transformation, and the optimization of its colossal design. The superorganism revealed itself gradually, but unmistakably. Mountains shifted subtly, as if alive, their ridges aligning into vast alien patterns, valleys rising or deepening in synchronous harmony with structures forming continents away. Rivers no longer followed natural courses. They poured into channels that formed living circuits, directing water to feed the organism's integrated systems, connecting oceans to forests to deserts in a coherent biological and geometric design. Forests twisted and grew with purpose, forming spires that reached thousands of meters, their branches locking together like scaffolding made of living wood. Oceans shimmered crimson, not merely colored but alive, with waves moving in patterns that reflected thought, intention, and direction. This was no weather. This was construction. Every red flake, every mutated plant, every altered animal and human behavior bore the mark of the hive mind's influence. The world had become alive in a way humanity could not survive, and the scope of that life was incomprehensible. Resistance was futile. Humans tried, of course. Attempts to destroy portions of the snow, to contain it, to flee it, failed spectacularly. Explosives and chemical agents had no lasting effect. Even when portions of cities were burned or flooded, the snow regenerated instantly, integrating the disruption into the larger design, adapting to the damage as if learning from it. Underground bunkers offered no sanctuary. Isolated cities, quarantined zones, even secure laboratories became part of the hive's network. Hallucinations penetrated dreams, thoughts, and subconscious perception, embedding instructions, observations, and data. Humans were no longer agents of choice. They were participants, whether willing or not, in the creation of something beyond understanding. Every heartbeat, every fear-driven action, every instinctual reaction had been absorbed and incorporated into the organism's design. Observers, desperate to find logic in the chaos, began noticing patterns in the madness. The hive mind was not simply terraforming Earth. It was preparing it. From orbit, the planet appeared transformed into a neural network, a living circuit board that spanned continents. Oceans, mountains, forests, deserts, and even cities had been woven into the organism's grid. Each human, each animal, every mutation contributed to the structural and functional integrity of this planetary system. The red snow itself acted as both hardware and software. Living crystals that formed circuits, transmitted data, repaired damages, and computed outcomes with unfathomable speed. Even the air seemed charged with intent, vibrating with information and subtle energy, carrying whispers of structure and form. Earth was no longer a planet merely inhabited. It had become a laboratory, a blueprint, a scaffold for something far greater. Human life, once the pinnacle of consciousness on the planet, had become an observational tool, a temporary component in an intelligence that was patient, adaptive, and utterly alien. Every mutation, every hallucination, every act of resistance or compliance was cataloged and integrated into the hive's ongoing construction. The planet itself pulsed with life, synchronized with the red snow, with every living organism, and with the invisible currents of intelligence threading through the continents. Humanity could only watch, helpless, as the hive mind orchestrated the final stages of its design, a superorganism beyond comprehension, beyond survival, and beyond the grasp of mortal imagination. Mutations were now ubiquitous. Forests had become living labyrinths of alien design. Plants had sprouted spiny, luminous appendages, some forming vast, tangled networks that stretched over entire forests, their luminescence pulsing like veins carrying energy across continents. Flowers glowed with eerie colors unseen before on Earth, radiating subtle heat and sound, as if each organism was alive not only in body, but in thought. Vines coiled into intricate latticework that extended hundreds of meters above the ground, weaving together with branches to create organic scaffolding that could support structures far beyond human comprehension. Trees shifted their roots in real time, forming subterranean networks that connected forests across vast distances, transmitting signals through the soil as the hive mind refined its planetary calculations. Animals had adapted at a rate impossible under natural evolution. Birds sprouted secondary wings, enabling them to maneuver through the twisting spires of mutated forests. Mammals developed exoskeletons, or elongated limbs to navigate terrain that was no longer recognizable. Marine life transformed into surreal colonies, creatures forming networks that functioned as living machinery, their coordinated movements echoing the precision of a single, intelligent organism. In every biome, life had become a tool, an extension of the hive's construction. Humans, though unable to adapt physically, were not spared. Every scream, every frantic attempt at survival, every hallucination fed the hive's understanding, strengthening the planetary organism as if humanity's terror were a nutrient. Hallucinations had evolved into more than just visions. They were instructional. Survivors reported seeing structures in impossible clarity, with details that conveyed function as well as form. Canals carrying nutrient flows, conduits transmitting energy across continents, mechanisms so vast and precise that comprehension itself was an exercise in futility. Humans glimpsed the interconnectedness of the superorganism, rivers, mountains, forests, and oceans functioning as components of a single, coherent system. The hive mind was not communicating to negotiate or threaten. It observed, recorded, and instructed using human perception as its medium. The message was unavoidable. Humanity was irrelevant. Individuals could flee, hide, or resist, but the visions insisted on their insignificance, engraving the same truth into every mind exposed. By the 8th week, the scale of the superorganism was undeniable. Networks now connected oceans, forests, deserts, and mountains, linking continents in a continuous, pulsing entity. Cities were partially absorbed into living frameworks, streets bent and twisted as living structures rose above and around them. Humans could look up and see bridges of red crystalline lattice forming, arc after arc suspended impossibly in mid-air, threaded with flowing streams of red snow. Rivers of crimson moved in precise synchronization, connecting terrestrial and aquatic systems, integrating both into a vast living machinery. The planet itself had become a neural network, an organism with a mind that extended across every ecosystem, every forest, every sea, and every city still clinging to life. Some scientists attempted to interpret the organism's logic, desperate to find patterns or predict outcomes. Their analyses revealed a horrifying truth. Every mutation, every hallucination, every human thought and action had been anticipated, calculated, and absorbed into the system. The red snow was simultaneously tool, medium, and building block, its falling crystals forming circuits, repairing damage, transmitting data, and refining construction in real time. Earth had ceased to exist as a planet for humans. It was step one, a seed planted for something far greater, something designed to thrive in ways beyond human perception or survival. And then the final communication arrived, not in voice or writing, but through visions experienced by survivors across the globe. Not threats, not demands, not even promises. Statements of cold, unflinching fact. You are temporary. Observation is complete. Preparation continues. This world is warm, fertile. Step one achieved. Those who saw it were left paralyzed with understanding. The message was simple, yet incomprehensible in its scale. Humanity had observed the process, and nothing it did would change the outcome. The red snow, the hive, the superorganism, they were eternal, adaptive, unstoppable. Earth was no longer human, and humanity was no longer central. Survival was inconsequential to the organism's plan. All that remained for those who lived was witness, horror, and the unbearable awareness of their own irrelevance. From orbit, satellites captured the full scope of the organism's presence. Earth no longer resembled the home humanity had known. Instead, it pulsed with life, crimson and radiant, every continent and ocean integrated into a single, interconnected structure. Forests, deserts, rivers, oceans, and cities had become nodes in a massive, planetary-scale organism. From space, the planet looked like a living lattice, veins of red flowing across the globe, arteries of energy and life linking ecosystems in patterns that defied all natural logic. Every hill, every mountain, every forest canopy, even the faintest ripple across an ocean's surface had been absorbed into the superorganism's design. The hive mind had integrated every living system, every human thought, every environmental variable into a coherent, adaptive intelligence. Earth was no longer a sanctuary for humanity. It was a laboratory, a scaffold, a first colony for an intelligence far older and infinitely more complex than the human mind could comprehend. The red snow continued to fall without pause, a constant rhythmic cascade that stitched together forests, oceans, deserts, and cities into a unified entity. It was no longer merely precipitation. It was construction material, a medium for communication, and a sensory network for the hive mind. Oceans shimmered crimson, their waves moving in synchronized patterns like the pulse of a living heart. Forests throbbed with alien bioluminescence, leaves and branches shifting in subtle, purposeful motion. Deserts glittered with geometric symmetry, dunes flowing and reforming as if the sand itself were alive. The superorganism expanded continuously, probing boundaries, adjusting construction, observing, calculating. Humanity had no influence over the process, no agency. Their role was complete. Step 1 had been executed flawlessly. From above, the planetary patterns were mesmerizing, horrifying, and precise. Rivers of red snow cut through cities like veins, interlinking skyscrapers and streets into circuits of alien architecture. The hive mind had woven humanity into the organism's systems, not as participants, but as observers, as data points to refine its calculations. Panic, fear, hallucination, death, all had been incorporated. Humanity had served its purpose, cataloged and analyzed, its significance fading like a flicker in the grand design. The message was clear, unavoidable. Earth was only the beginning. Other worlds, other ecosystems would follow. Humanity had been temporary, incidental, irrelevant, and so the Earth was no longer under human dominion. It had become an alien construction, a planet-spanning superorganism that breathed, pulsed, and thought on a scale beyond comprehension. The red snow, once a strange weather anomaly, had revealed itself as both tool and network, building material and communication system. The intelligence behind it was patient, eternal, and fully aware. Its creation was complete in step 1, but this was only a foundation, the seed of something far greater. Step 2 awaited, and humanity's role, if it existed at all, was irrelevant to what would come next. The red snow fell endlessly, layer upon layer, saturating oceans, coating forests, drifting over deserts. Everywhere it touched, it left a trace of the hive mind, integrating, observing, and calculating. Human survivors could only watch, witnessing the completion of something they could neither fight nor comprehend. Every ripple of the oceans, every pulse of the forests, every glittering grain in the deserts was part of a living intelligence, ancient and patient, building, observing, preparing. Beneath it all, somewhere within the global lattice, the hive mind waited, alive, aware, biding its time, preparing for step 2, a stage humanity could not see, could not predict, and could not survive. The planet itself had become a monument to alien logic and patience, a vast crimson superorganism that encompassed every living thing, every environment, and every trace of human existence. Step 1 was complete. The red snow, now eternal, continued to fall as if marking time itself. Each flake a signal, a memory, a building block in a design humanity could only begin to imagine. And somewhere deep within the global organism, the hive mind pulsed with consciousness, aware of every observer, every reaction, every thought, preparing, always preparing, for the next step in a plan that spanned worlds, civilizations, and epochs beyond reckoning.